Here. I'm actually wonderfully fortunate that the gentlemen before me have both spoken very eloquently about what sustainability is and a lot of the mechanisms by which it actually occurs, by which it happens in restaurants and in practice. And what I want to speak to you about today is really what sustainability is on a contextual scale. We had a really good definition of it from both gentlemen. Sustainability really means at its core perpetual consumption, this idea of enduring. But what that doesn't answer is what are we actually trying to sustain? What do we want to endure? It should be a black screen. Yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. What do we want to endure on this planet? And so that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. I was very fortunate enough to be born and raised in a family in a very multi-ethnic neighborhood of Washington, D.C. And my parents took two things very, very seriously, reading and food. And I had to read about a book probably about every day until books got longer and less pictures in them, at which point I had to read a couple a week. And I was very fortunate in that. I was exposed to a lot of different viewpoints. And one of which, a quote that I brought with me all the way through my life, John Hersey, in a very famous book called Blues. It's a book between a conversation between a stranger and a fisherman about the nature of our relationship with our world. And then he says, in our quest for food, we begin to find our place in the systems of this world. And what I love about this quote so much is that I think it quite accurately describes that we are not sovereign over our resources, but rather that we are simply because of them. It is literally a transcommunication with our world. The life of the world, we take it into our bodies in order to create our own lives, to sustain ourselves. As I mentioned, my parents also took food very seriously. And we had lived in this multi-ethnic neighborhood where we had Eritrean, Ethiopian, Guatemalan, Honduranian, El Salvadorian, we had Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, El Salvadorian, I mean just, you name it. World Bank transients, first immigrant generations, we had embassy workers. And there popped up to serve all their cultural needs each little corner bodegas with all of the products for each of these cultures. And so we would do a lot of our shopping in these tiny little places. And just the wonder, the joy of experiencing and exploring the sights, the sounds, the textures, the aromas of all of these things, walking through an Ethiopian spice aisle. I mean, it's just, it blows your mind. We had access to things like starfruit and goat meat, and things that have never really made it into the culinary lexicon of America or North America, but have always been a part of things. And I would come home, I'd hear that dinner bell ring, and I would run home from playing football in the streets with my friends. And I'd find my dad home from work, his tie off and apron donned, and there he'd be pressing out masa harina, and making the tortillas for taco night. Or he'd be doing up an East Indian curry or stir fry or something. The whole house aromatized with something new, a flavor that was an exploration for my brother-in-law. But what I realized was a physical exploration for myself, for my brother, also happened to represent literally eons of culture and identity. For the varied students, for the various kids, for the varied friends who populated my world. I very early on understood that food is a lens through which we explore our world. And that's been a central theme of my career and my life. I also had the great fortune of spending my summers on the Patuxent River, Chesapeake, tributary of the Great Chesapeake. And this is the very first victim of my great and longevitous piscatorial murder spree. This is a poor sculpin. But there I would spend my afternoons in search of food. I'd run up and down the pilings, pulling off giant male blue crabs, throwing back anything with a carapace size less than 7 inches, which is unheard of. Every third cast of my line would come back a striped bass, bluefish, spot, skate, perch, porgy, ray, skate, shark, eel, whatever it was. There was bounty in these waters. I spent my day in search of food, finding my little place in the systems of this little world. And it was amazing. I mean, I would wait till late in the afternoon when the sun had set to a particular level, and I would go wading through the eelgrass in the marshes. And I would wait because then, at that point in the day, I could see the poisonous water moccasin snakes slithering through and knew where to avoid while I was in search of the blue soft-shell crabs, the greatest delicacy of the Chesapeake Bay. When I was a very young chef, though, I was very lucky in that I had the opportunity at 25 years old to helm my first restaurant. And when I went to write my menu, I thought about what narrative of my life, what about me do I want to express to the world? Because that, in fact, is what a menu is. And so I looked to my history. I looked to my past. What about me did I want to express? Well, I wanted to express the bounty with which I was so familiar. So I got on the phone and I said, send me bluefish, send me striped bass, send me crabs, send me oysters. And the other end of the line said, kid, what are you talking about? Those are gone. I said, gone? What do you mean gone? We already ate all of those. They're not here anymore. And it was really a big blow to me. The bounty with which I was so fluent and familiar with as a child was literally gone. Not poof, vanished, disappeared. And I realized then that the guiding hand of natural selection is quite firmly holding a fork. The decisions that we make for dinner have a very impactful relationship with our natural world. Wendell Berry says the way we eat largely describes how the world is used. I began to ask for answers. Why did this happen? I began to look into and investigate food systems and how this depletion could be possible. I was in Washington, D.C. There are plenty of environmental groups around, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of mentors, people that were happy and helpful to guide me through the process of really understanding what food systems were. But the answers that I was getting back, I really didn't like. I was getting back an answer that really largely kind of has defined environmentalism since 1967. And it's the idea of the tragedy of the commons. An absolutely fabulous paper written by Dr. Garrett Hardin, which I suggest that you read. And in it, it basically describes that man, left to his own will destroy the planet. And guess what? He's right. But tragedy of the commons. It's an empirical measure of how we have impacted ecosystems, very much to their detriment. It only provides a role for humans as the bad actors. I mean, at very best, we may sustain something, but even that only presents us as being neutral within that system, causing no harm. We're just sustaining. I don't like that answer. Nothing about the narrative of my menu had tragedy on it. I mean, hey, welcome to my restaurant. Tonight we have shame on you and miasma. Well, no, that's not what we do. Hospitality professionals, that's not what we sell. We sell joy and warmth, hospitality. We sell communion, sharing, giving, receiving. We share the very fundamental essences of why it's beautiful to be human. And so I wasn't about to go out to my customers and sell them, through my narrative, a story of woe. But I also believed in something. This idea occurred to me in my head as I listened to all of these stories over and over again about this tragedy. All the impacts that we've had. The story, bad, human, bad. Well, hey, if humans are the problem, awesome! We're the solution. So I began to look at things in a much more positive light. Not humans as the bad actor, but humans as the solution. I began to call environmentalism that I was practicing the communion of the commons. I began to look at it as a narrative of our human experiences and how we are impacted by ecosystems, rather than how we impact the systems themselves. Food systems, and the way that we speak about them, rarely incorporate that human element. It was great to hear both of you speaking about the fact that we're sustaining economies. But all too often, environmentalism is literally that. It's a story about the environment. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with the environment. There's only something wrong with the way that we interact with it. And so I looked to the very human narrative. And I looked to the tools that we have that begin to help us make sense of our impact. The Marine Stewardship Council, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Guide, organic labels, biodynamic, recycling programs, I mean a whole host of things, fair trade, which was mentioned. We have all of these snapshots, these pictures of our world. By and large, they're pictures of how we impact systems. And you all probably heard the old statement, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But when we talk about sustainability, a picture might be worth 1,000 words, but it takes another 10,000 to validate that picture, and then it takes another 100,000 to contextualize it, so that it actually makes sense in our lives. And so I left restaurants. I had the opportunity to join the National Geographic Society as an explorer, specifically seeking an answer to the question of what are we trying to sustain? To really explore the human story of our environment. At National Geographic, I have the amazing opportunity of interacting with, on a regular basis, some of the very people that are literally defining a century's worth of knowledge. Dr. Sylvia Earle, Bob Ballard, Jared Diamond. I mean, these are people that are literally defining a generation's worth of knowledge. But the people that I enjoy the most at National Geographic, by far, are the photographers. Brilliant, brilliant, brave men and women, sent out into our world as witness for the rest of us, to go be a part of something that you and I will likely never see. And there they are, standing in witness to our world, with a camera, there ready, to bring back a souvenir for the rest of us of this relationship. I mean, how many of us are ever going to go 3,000 feet below the Southern Ocean with Brian Scary? How many of us are actually going to bend through the glacial hills of Alaska to understand what is truly the greatest migration on Earth, the transfer of marine phytonutrients coming back all the way up into the tundra forests? How many of us will ever have the opportunity to hike through the old spice plantations of Madagascar, to personally visit the ghosts of colonialism, and to feel the physical scars left on our planet and our civilization by their global spice trade? Not many of us will. And this is what National Geographic does for us. This is what these photographers do. These souvenirs that are printed in the vaunted pages of that yellow magazine, which bring to us an unerring understanding of our world. But how many of you ever eaten Chilean sea bass? Or had a little bit of wild BC salmon with some black pepper sprinkled on? Just as National Geographic sends an expert eye and witness to our world, so too do we. We just send our forks in our place. Food is how we interact with our world. It is the most celebratory and intimate relationship that, in fact, we do have with our world. We literally take the world inside of us in order to sustain us. Now, the era of exploration is kind of coming to a crux, to a little, to a crucible. We've dove the depths, we've climbed the heights, we've flown the distances, we've tracked the migrations. We've gathered so much knowledge about our planet that the next great discoveries won't become from gathering new knowledge, but rather they will come from relating to the knowledge that we already have about our planet, in seeking to find our place in the systems of this world. One of my great friends and mentors, Dr. Carl Safina, founder of the Blue Ocean Institute, and the ridiculously prolific author in one of the 3 books that he published last year. A View from Lazy Point has an amazing, amazing quote. He says, "We were a hunter-gatherer society, culture. From there we became an agrarian society. From agrarian, we became civilized. The next great leap will be for us to become humanized." And I don't know of anything that is more human than dinner. We are the only species on this planet that has ritualized the act of feeding. And dinner itself is one of the very best parts about being human. In fact, it reminds us of why it is beautiful as that we are such. Communion, compassion, sharing, giving, hospitality, the very things that have inspired you to be in this room, to be part of this program, to found and deliver the wonderful education that you do at this school. That is dinner, the very human art of it. So I want to tell you a couple of stories about my explorations of dinner that I've been fortunate enough to see. I was a chef in southern Spain for a little while, working in a little Michelin-starred restaurant, had a donkey, a forager, a fisherman, all sorts of great things. I was having the time of my life. The restaurant closed down for the season, and I was wandering around south of Spain, just kind of aimlessly killing time before the restaurant opened again. And I was coming down into Algeciras, a tiny little port town in the very southern tip of Spain. And the hostel that I was going to stay at for the night was closed. So, crap, what am I going to do? I just got off the bus at the next stop, and, well, this looks like an official building. I walked in, my bad Spanish, their bad Spanish, because this is in South Spain, they didn't really speak Spanish. Anyway, this whole interaction happened, and I kind of got herded up this plank, and all of a sudden I was out some money, and the door closed, and oh crap, 2 hours later I'm in Africa. I literally ended up in Africa by accident. And I lived there for 7 months. And it was fabulous. I crossed the border in Ceuta, which is actually an enclave of Spain on the African continent. And from there, I hitchhiked across the border and then got up with the Berber Drive. And this Berber Drive, basically I followed one of their trade routes. And we went down through Rabat, Casablanca, Marrakesh, Ouarzazate, Yaqashia, Mahamid, out way out to the desert, Sahara, into Algeria, down into Western Sahara, and then back up through the coast of Agadir, and ended up in a city called Essaouira. Essaouira is the beautiful, white-walled arts capital of Morocco. And it's where the trade winds really buffet the coast. And there, I found a home. And I spent about 6 months there. And I'd spend my days walking around these quiet, smoky, hazy Medinas, just bustling with activity, and yet so hushed with this murmur of just everybody knowing their place and their role. This picture I took probably, this was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is bright sun. See all that haze? That's the aroma of things smoking, oranges, teas, spices, leather tanneries. I mean, just an amazing, amazing experience for a young person, so sensorially trained. I mean, it was overload. I began to take my meals every day at these charcoal shacks that had been set up along the ramparts that protected the city from the pounding surf there. And these men would just, I didn't speak their language, they didn't speak mine, but yet we communicated because we were all fluent in food. And so I found there a communion, a way to actually make some friends. And he would just point at the fish he wanted, and they'd grill it up over the charcoal. They'd take a bucket of seawater and sprinkle some on, and as it evaporated, the sea salt crystals would form on the fish, seasoning it. It would be served with the relish of pepper, onion, and olive oil. Hey, there you go. Best meals of my life. And just as I began to befriend the cooks, I began to befriend the fishermen. And so I began to actually work on these little boats, these little barcas. The little boats, the same design has been used for 10 generations. These men going out, braving, pounding surf. We're talking 8, 12-foot swells. And there they are, perched like Baryshnikov in the bow of this boat. I mean, just bodies in perfect unison for motion, perfectly attuned. And there they look for just this little flicker under the water, something I never saw. Literally, within just an inhuman speed, this net would be cast forth. And with each cast of that net, they were casting in the hopes of catching dinner, not dollars. Every time that net came back in, they hoped they caught a few sardines. Every now and then, there was a few mackerel. Once in a blue moon, there was a tuna. Something that began to strike me, something I began to realize is that these men, each cast carried with it the needs of their community, the needs of their family. The first fish they catch fed their family. That was their only meal. These men felt fortunate for the fact that they were able to participate in the bounty of this world. The second fish they caught went to feed me. And I grew up in a family where we never needed anything. But I grew up in a neighborhood where I was exposed to a lot of kids that did. And while I was always grateful for what I had had in my life, I never actually been proven how fortunate I was. And it was that idea of feeling fortunate for what we were given on this planet that really struck me. And that's what came back with me. When I got back to America running restaurants again, I realized that we have some pretty skewed ideas of things. And it's not all our fault. There's this great political slogan in which Hubert Humphrey promised a chicken in every pot, which is actually a misquoted Henry V saying, "For my subjects I wish a chicken in every pot on Sundays." Well, thankfully we've done away with that kind of the subjects part. But we've also done away with the Sundays part. To great detriment. Having what we want all the time has brought with it not happiness, not joy, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, diseases, symptoms of not feeling fortunate enough. And there's a great parable in which I think describes what I saw. I'm not a particularly religious person, but there's a story in the Bible, Jesus and loaves and fishes, where Jesus goes to the seashore and the masses throng to hear him preach. And then somebody has a really bad idea and says, "Hey Jesus, I'm hungry, you got any food?" And everybody's like, And all of a sudden, a boy emerges from the crowd with 3 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And from this, one of the great miracles of the Bible ensues, that Jesus is able to feed the masses. And then furthermore, instructs his disciples to gather the crumbs so that nothing might be wasted. Whoa. What an idea. Now, we can't do that. We can't just make more fish. We've tried aquaculture. We can't just plow under more rainforest to make more bread, plant more wheat. We can't do that. So we have to look at the replicable miracle of that story, which is that everybody took what they needed and they shared the rest. The tragedy of the commons is not the destruction of the commons, but the fact that we no longer have access to them. The great philosopher Alfred North Whitehead described tragedy as a human construct, and it is defined as the senseless and remorseless working of things. And it is in tragedy, in drama, it is in drama that the futility of our escape becomes the great drama of our lives. The human tragedy is no longer having access to the resources, to the commons that sustain us. And this is at the heart of our modern crisis, and what the sustainability dialogue is really all about. And this speaks to a very deep-seated anxiety that strikes at the very heart of our most basic assumptions of what it takes to thrive in our contemporary world, where we have a growing uncertainty whether the relationship between humans and nature is one based or primarily defined by abundance or by scarcity. I mean, the human condition has historically been defined as the awareness of our own limitations, the awareness of death, the awareness of the limits of life, the limits of comfort, the limits of food. It is our awareness of these limits that have caused us to feel pain, to regret missed opportunities. It is this awareness that also allows us to celebrate successes and achievements. It is this awareness that allows us to embrace love. But the human condition of the Western world has changed. It's no longer about limits, for we have long surpassed nature's boundaries, or so we have thought. The Western world's human condition is different because we've forgotten the stinging pain of hunger. We've defined the mysteries of our planet, and we have defied death through medicine. We have literally used science and technology to replace limits with a sense of inevitability. We have this idea deeply ingrained in our societies that all of our ills will be cured, better living through science. We have this idea that the hunger of this world will simply just be fed. We have this idea that peace will be achieved. And this is a great thing to dream about. Except we've been lulled into thinking that we don't actually need to participate in this process, and that we don't need to change our behaviors to make any of this happen. But there is no technical solution to any problem that is not also associated and accompanied by a behavioral solution. There is no loaves and fishes for us on this planet. We need to create a human solution, one that re-examines what we think we deserve to take from our planet, to redefine what we think we need. I'm going to tell you a quick story about another fishery, the Peruvian anchoveta. It is one country, and there 40 million metric tons per year are taken. It accounts for a full 10% of the entire global catch of seafood every year. 10%, one country, one fishery. And 98% of that never feeds a human being. It's ground up into the moisturizer that we put on our faces. It's in the linoleum tiles on our ceiling. It's ground up into fish meal and fish oil to feed to pigs, to chickens, to cows, to salmon. In a world of growing population, of this idea of loaves and fishes, where we're all moving to the seashore, the masses are thronging and they're hungry. People are saying, I'm hungry. Do you have any fish? And we say, no, I'm sorry, we fed it to the pigs. Not a good idea. I went to a fish meal plant there, which processed 14,000 tons per day of anchoveta. It employed 28 people. 12 of those 28 were security guards. I went to an anchovy canning factory. You've all seen those. You open the little flag, and there they are. Processed 2 tons a day. Employed 150 people. Sustainability is not about finding more food to feed more people. It's about better feeding people with the food that we have. The task at hand, the human condition itself, is that we must now humanely condition our planet and use it in ways so that we may sustain ourselves and our place here in the systems of this world. Think about this. More people on this planet are made sick, die, or lead limited lives due to the misuse of food, overconsumption. More people die or are made ill from overconsumption than die from starvation. We are not using our planet smartly. This is not even sustainable. I'm talking smart. Just straight up logic. We know the pleasures of eating, and yet we ignore the pain of overconsumption. We hide behind expanding waistlines and the social acceptance of diseases built on the symptoms of feeling not fortunate for that which we are so blessed. So when we talk about sustainability, we often talk about simply the tools of it, the mechanisms. Recycling, organic, carbon trade, greenless, threadless, fair trade. We have all these fabulous tools to help guide us through the process. But we don't have a robust discussion about what we are using these tools to build. What are we seeking to actually achieve with these mechanisms? And as I said, sustainability is not about finding more food to feed more people. It's about better nourishing people with the food that we have. The health of our bodies comes from the health of our environments. The health of our environments gives us the health of food. And that is how we will sustain ourselves. We need to rationalize our relationship with our oceans, with our land, celebrating those who bring us access to it. For without farmers, there are no farms. Without farms, there is no food. Without fishermen, there is no seafood. We must embrace and participate our role in our ecosystems. But with any recipe, it's really all about balance at the end. It's all about, in this case, a balance between abundance and scarcity, and trying to figure out what that means to us in our lives. And sustainability, ultimately, and here's the positive part, begins with you. Just as I saw the opportunity that if we're the problem, then we're the solutions. Hell yeah! Great! Then it's up to me. I'm going to solve this problem, and so are you. Doesn't that give you hope? And doesn't that engage us in this process? It begins with you asking yourself, though, what are you trying to sustain? And then it requires you to realign your expectations of what you think you need. So one of the things that I ask you to do is to shed the term sustainable, a term that literally limits us to endure. And let's talk instead in terms of restoration, a verb that implies action, that allows us to give ourselves credit for earning the reality which we so enjoy on this planet, that gives us credit for earning our lifestyle by behaving in ways that are sustainable. So I just want to end with a benediction, which is when you sit down to dinner tonight, tomorrow night, breakfast, whatever it is, you go to Tim Hortons, you go to a restaurant, wherever it is that you meet with care. Simply be mindful of the impact of your choices. Eat with joy and celebrate the fact that we may continue to participate in the bounty of this planet. And ultimately, it's to eat together in the communion of the commons, to remind us of what unites us all on this big, beautiful, and mostly blue planet.